I think many of us have encountered female versions of medieval armor in games and movies. Usually, this kind of armor is worn on a naked body and, in terms of realism, it doesn't even smell good because, besides bra armors, there are much more suitable options for fantasy female armor. In this issue, we will talk about them and decide if there is any point in female armor in real life. We start the analysis with a breastplate made to fit the female anatomy. This initially looks unquestionably idiotic, as even female warriors would remove their breasts so they wouldn't hinder them, and here the armor is trying to emphasize them. It is understandable that there are no such examples of armor in reality because women, for the most part, did not fight on battlefields on par with men. Of course, there are individual exceptions like Joan of Arc, but even then, such women simply wore male armor because nothing prevented them from doing so. The thing is, female breasts are soft tissue, not bone or muscle, and that's why they can easily fit into flat metal armor. It may be uncomfortable, but it is much easier than trying to shape metal around them. Moreover, different men have different body types, resulting in different waist, shoulder, and chest measurements. It should be said that in modern combat sports and sports fencing, women still use anatomical breast protection. However, it fits directly against the body and therefore should be the same shape as the breasts. But for armor, this is not necessary. After all, armor is not worn directly on bare skin, and if we are talking about a steel breastplate, it is worn over fairly thick cushioning clothing. Often, chainmail is worn over that as well. In this case, all the female curves, no matter how voluminous they may be, are significantly smoothed out and do not require detailed anatomical customization of the steel armor. As a rule, the armor was made in such a way that blows would slide off. For these purposes, either a convex hemispherical shape of the breastplate or the shape of a boat's bottom is perfect. The latter has ribs of stiffness in the center, which divides the breastplate along the body axis. Such a design reflects any piercing blow and also gives the cuirass additional strength. It was difficult to dent such armor even in the late Middle Ages when attempting to deform it with a battle hammer or other striking weapons. By the way, there is a special type of medieval breastplate that would be well suited for the female anatomy. It is called the German cuirass, known for its rough edges but highly functional forms of all protective elements, especially the breastplate. It is designed to perfectly deflect any piercing blow, including those from a lance. Although originally made for men, a woman could comfortably wear it. It turns out that a fantasy female anatomical breastplate is still not a practical solution. Simultaneously yes and no. On the one hand, it is actually irrational to manufacture embossed half-spheres on a cuirass. Firstly, in the areas where such convexities are forged, the metal becomes thinner, and the thickness of the armor plates greatly determines the degree of protection for the warrior in combat. Of course, it would be logical to assume that the blacksmith would take a sheet of metal with a reserve of a few extra millimeters to manufacture such convexities. However, forging a metal chest will still be difficult, especially without compromising its strength characteristics. Moreover, why bother if there are already other ready-made solutions that are more reliable, cheaper, and simpler to manufacture? Secondly, there is an opinion that the presence of such hemispheres can have negative consequences during a battle when a piercing strike slides into their joint. In this case, all the energy from the strike will be transferred directly to the knight's body, and even if the armor is not penetrated, the impact will still be significantly high. This can lead to either blunt trauma to internal organs or a sternum fracture. In my opinion, such damage can only be obtained from an enemy rider's lance strike at full gallop. However, on the battlefield, this is quite possible. Thirdly, the metal hemispheres are much easier to penetrate or deform with a warhammer than a similar armor without these protrusions. Therefore, for a mace-wielding warrior in a late medieval battle, such protrusions would be like a simple dimple, just a stress-relieving toy. At the same time, men's anatomical armor did exist in real history, albeit for a short period of time. Before you was a bronze ancient Greek cuirass known as the hepathorax. It is a breastplate made of two metallic plates with sculpted musculature of the male torso. Such armor belonged to hoplites, ancient Greek warriors, and was actively used from the 8th to the 4th century BC. Cuirasses of the ancient period were made by forging but more commonly cast from bronze. A little later, the Romans developed the lorica musculata, also known as muscular armor, which was used as the standard soldier's breastplate in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. Much of its design was inspired by the ancient Greek hoplite. One of the oldest analogues to this type of armor is the Celtic breastplate, although they had completely different symbolic images and anatomy. and the emphasis on muscles was not depicted on them, unlike the chest muscles. These breastplates were also made of bronze and can be dated back to the 6th to 4th centuries BC. However, it is no secret that in the future, anatomical armor nearly disappeared and became an element of ceremonial and parade attire. Does this mean that she was rejected because her forms were impractical and poorly protective? Not exactly. At least, initially, the use of muscle logic was rejected for economic reasons. Because of its monolithic construction, the armor was expensive to produce and repair. Therefore, with the invention of logica hamet, which is a regular male armor, Roman soldiers began to equip themselves with it. This made the muscle cuirass a luxury for higher-ranking commanders. At the same time, in terms of engineering design, male anatomical armor also lags behind more progressive medieval breastplates. Although the difference in development between them is approximately 1,500 years in metallurgy and military craftsmanship, the various convexities are still a major disadvantage of the muscular armor. The problem is not just in the convexities themselves, but also in the echoes at their connections. The breastplate of the late Middle Ages is designed in a way that the blade of a sword or spear will slide off to the side, while with the Greek rex, it will get stuck in the places where the cubes of the press are connected, thus realizing the full force of the impact on the armor. As with female anatomical armor, even if the armor is not pierced, the impact will not disappear, which will also result in a blunt trauma. Therefore, in the future, such relief was abandoned in favor of a globular shape or a shape with a central ridge of stiffness. As a result, seeing muscular armor in the late Middle Ages would have been very unusual. However, aesthetics do not disappear from human culture. Therefore, when the fashion for all things ancient returned to Europe in the 16th century, Emperor Charles V already in 1546 created himself engraved armor with anatomical and terrace-like features known as logica musculata. So, the idea of emphasizing the external attractiveness of the armor wearer is not an invention of the fantasy genre, but something that people have done throughout their history. It would be logical to assume that if women had fought alongside men throughout the history of the early Middle Ages, they could have made armor with prominently defined mammary glands, regardless of the impracticality and inexpediency of such a design, to emphasize their femininity, prioritizing aesthetics above all else. By the late Middle Ages, it would have been possible for box-like armor or a similar analog to provide better protection while simultaneously highlighting the unique features of a woman's figure. In this way, Coste and Bruist could have become fully fledged female armor for the Central and late Middle Ages. Write what you think about this and suggest topics for future episodes in the comments below the video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Goodbye, everyone.